All right, we will go ahead and get started this afternoon because I know we have a lot of wonderful discussion to get to. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the ASHE Outstanding Book Award Fireside Chat. My name is Angela Hoffman Cooper, and I use she and her pronouns. I'm the Director of Conference and Events with ASHE, the Association for the Study of Higher Education. And it's truly my pleasure to welcome you today. And I want to thank you each for taking time out of your day to be here and celebrate this wonderful work and book that we'll be talking about today. Today's webinar has closed captioning enabled using Zoom AI. You can select the captioning icon on the bottom of your screen for the captions to display. There is a chance that that's going to be tucked under the More button on your Zoom window down at the bottom. So if you don't view the caption button right away, maybe check under the More menu. And I also want to share with everyone that this webinar is also being recorded. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge the land that I'm joining you from in virtual community today. I'm joining with you today from the Anishinaabe homelands, unfairly ceded in the Treaty of 1842. The Chequamegon Bay region is home to the Bad River and Radcliffe tribes, located adjacent to Lake Superior, Gitchigami, in what is now known as northern Wisconsin. I acknowledge and respect the many Indigenous peoples, past and present, connected to this land, and also understand that my actions in this space and community have an impact on the people, land, waters, and beings of this area. I invite each of us to reflect on the history and the enduring presence of the land and people we are in relationship with as we tune in from our respective locations. I also am so excited to share my personal enthusiasm for this chat today with Dr. Amanda Tachine about her book, Native Presence and Sovereignty in College, Sustaining Indigenous Weapons to Defeat Systemic Monsters. I also want to extend gratitude to the ASHE Outstanding Book Award Committee for their selection of this really important work. We'll be using Zoom webinar for our discussion today, and you are welcome to enter questions in the Q&A box on the bottom of your Zoom menu. Questions will be addressed both during the chat and at the end. Additionally, ASHE staff will be here behind the scenes to assist you should you have any questions or need any support with your experience during the discussion today. You're welcome to send me a private chat here in Zoom or email me at angela@ashe.ws. We also have our virtual events code of conduct. ASHE is committed to providing a safe, productive, and welcoming environment at our events, and I'll be sure to chat out our code of conduct into the chat so you can review it as you wish. With that, I'm truly excited for our discussion today with our esteemed moderators and award-winning author. And gratitude again to each of you for making time to join us. With that, I'll turn it over to one of our two moderators, Dr. Federick No, ASHE Outstanding Book Award Committee Chair, to take us forward today.
Thank you so much, Angela, and thanks to all of you who are joining us virtually for this really exciting and important event. My name is Federick No, he, him. I'm an assistant professor of higher education at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, which is in the city of Las Vegas and which sits on the ancestral homelands of the Southern Paiute. As you know, Las Vegas was host to the 2022 ASHE conference, and because we could not make this event happen in person there, we wanted to do so now because it is just so important for this outstanding book and scholar to be recognized. I'm joined by my co-host, Charlie Amaya Scott, who will introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, everyone. As you already know, my name is Charlie Amaya Scott. My English pronouns are they, them, and she, hers. I'm currently a fourth-year PhD candidate at the University of Denver, which occupies the homelands of the Cheyenne and Arapaho and Ute. And along with that, I currently am living and reconnecting with my homelands as I am a citizen of the Navajo Nation. I'm also the second-year graduate student board member for the ASHE board.
Thank you so much, Charlie. It's so great to have grad student voice and representation here. I'm also representing the ASHE 2022 Outstanding Book Award Committee, which includes Dr. Chase Catalano, Dr. Tanisha Lane, Dr. Robert Palmer, and Olivia Morales, another graduate student. So the Outstanding Book Award recognizes a book that makes a significant contribution to the study of higher education. The award is open to any book published within the last year that advances theory, knowledge, practice, pedagogy, and/or policies in the field of higher education. We are delighted to recognize Dr. Amanda Tachine for the book Native Presence and Sovereignty in College, Sustaining Indigenous Weapons to Defeat Systemic Monsters. Welcome. I wanted to first, before we go into our fireside chat, to share some words from the nominating statement and from the committee. So there's a whole process where books are nominated by peers and colleagues in the field, and then our committee reviews them. And usually for the winners, I sort of ask the committee to write some remarks about why this is the book that was chosen. So I'm going to share two quotes. Simply put, this is one of the most significant higher education books in recent memory. The book charts new and exciting scholarly territory in Indigenous decolonial education, Indigenous theory and methodology, while captured in a beautiful, humanizing, and uncompromising vision of Native nation building. And another quote, it is written with love of community and people at the center, while concurrently offering cutting-edge research methodologies and theorizing. In short, this is a groundbreaking piece of work that is one of the most important higher education texts to be produced in years. So if you haven't gotten a chance to get a copy, oh, my blur, gotten a chance to get a copy, please check it out. This book is absolutely stunning, and I'm just excited to get to hear more directly from the author today. So our first question is, how did the idea for this book come about? What inspired your research, and what inspirations did you draw upon?
I just want to first begin and tell both of you and ASHE how immensely grateful I am to have this conversation, recognizing that, selecting one book is just, it sounds daunting, and I'm sure there's a lot that goes into it, but also I know and I recognize that there are so many beautiful books out right now. I mean, it's really a beautiful time to be alive, to be able to relish in the knowledge that people are creating and praying and thinking about and offering so many of us. And so to be alongside all of those folks who are writing during a time, many of us were writing during COVID. I know that there's that layer as well. It's really humbling, and my heart is bursting, my heart is beating so hard right now. And I'm just really grateful. So a hat to ASHE for seeing this book as a value, meaning it's not about me, it's really about the Indigenous knowledge and systems that are part of this work, and it's about the students and their stories, and seeing value to a community that is too often erased. And so it just makes me so happy to be in conversation with you all today, and to know that you all engage so deeply with the book. I'm just over the moon around so many times. And I'm so sorry I wasn't able to attend ASHE this year. Oh, I wanted to so badly, but I had COVID, and I just was thinking about all of you and celebrating during that time. To answer your question and what inspired me to write this book, it's because of my children. I see this book as a love letter I start Dear Chalchene to my children. And I have a mother of 3, and I'm an auntie to many. I can probably be a stern auntie to some of them. But I'm also been a former teacher. So I taught on the reservation in my hometown of Ganado. I taught in Tucson with predominantly O'odham and Pascua Yaqui students. I have lived a life where I've been surrounded by Native young people and college students, and it's just a privilege. And so I felt like this was a book for them. And so that is what made me get up every day to write, because it's not easy to write, and it's not easy. It's in many ways it feels you're by yourself. But what gave me the energies to get up was because I was thinking of Shalchene, my children. So this is a love letter to them, and in many ways it's a love letter to my younger self, because a lot of the stories that the students were sharing is stuff that I've encountered, and also things I'm still working through. Monsters are still real. I'm still trying to figure out my weapons, all that. And so it was a love letter to myself saying, you did good, Mandy, you made it, that you cultivated this. Yeah, so that is what made me want to keep going.
Your description of this book as a love letter was just so clear, especially to me as another Native scholar. And I think the fact that you wrote this during a very difficult time, both, I think, particularly for our communities, Native communities across the US empire during COVID. My question is like, in what ways did writing this love letter heal you? And possibly how might have healed your own community?
Oh, that's such a generative question. Thank you for asking. Yeah, well, this book has been in the making for a while. I graduated with my dissertation in 2015, and I was a part of that. We're in 2000, it came out 2022. And I want to be honest with that date because it wasn't a quick process. It was hard. Writing can be really, really difficult, and I recognize that. And there was many times in that process where I just was about to give up. So many times where I thought, I'm not going to do this. And, different people, I feel like they're like angels, were a part of my life throughout to encourage me to keep going. Then COVID hit. And when COVID hit, we all are still feeling the reverberations of COVID in many ways. I'm still working through what was that for me, but what I can share is that were months where it was blurry, like I can't remember. And there were months where every time the phone rang, I would freak out because I was worried, who's next? My mom lived with me. And so when your mom lives with you, we often get the calls for family extended because she's one of the matriarchs. And so that's why I was aware of what's happening more so than probably if she wasn't living in our home. So I felt that pain so deeply, while at the same time on social media, our then president of the Navajo Nation was beginning to tweet out on a daily basis the number of Navajo citizens who were tested positive, that were those who had gone on and so forth. And that whole thing too was some ways jarring to get daily tweets. But then at the same time, he was sharing that, using the language of monsters, that COVID was a monster, and, giving talks across at different times. And because as many of you may know, Navajos were hit really bad per capita. We were per capita more so than even in New York, and New York felt it as well. So when he was using the monster framing, that's when I was at a moment of hold on. COVID is not the monster, because I was seeing it because I was part of the writing. I'm like, no, COVID is the hauntings from the monster, or the systemic ways that makes COVID spread so fast with our communities. Because we're of course, how can you wash your hands every time when you don't have running water, or when you're living in multi-generational homes like my families have? To separate, if someone is positive, how do you separate yourself from them? You're gonna sleep in your vehicle? I mean, are you gonna really this is real things. And so then I was thinking at that time about, it gave me a newfound energy to be this book needs to go out, because the language we use for ourselves, these the monster, we don't get to the root of what are the systems and the ways in which the systems is what is making us live in the struggle and in status quo and dying. And when we don't use that language, then it can turn where we feel we're at fault. And I think we were feeling that way, even with COVID, we're at fault because our numbers are going so high because we can't be clean. We're not being careful enough. We're not wearing a mask, even though we're doing all the things right. And that's horrible. But not recognizing it's the conditions that we have a weak healthcare infrastructure, the way we live. I mean, the lack of water, that's the monster. It's the conditions that create it. And the hauntings is the COVID. And so that pushed me to be this is happening. This is operating in education. This is operating in the lives of the students that they shared. And so it gave me then this energy of like, Amanda, get this book done now. And so it was a healing process for me then, especially when I was going through like the weapons the students were sharing about prayer and family and love and kinship. Oh man. There were moments where I would just cry because I needed those words too. So it was healing in that respect. Is the students are so wise, and they got me through. They made me get up every morning, and I say that a lot because I think some days it felt like you don't want to get out of bed, but I would like, no, I have to get up. I have to finish writing. I got to get writing. So this book, in many ways, you can tell, I'm sorry, I'm crying, but it evokes like I just have it just was so personally like connected to the stories, and it helped me heal and be a mother to my babies and to be a good loving daughter to my mom who is also hurting, and to my husband who is dealing with so much. So the students, if you're listening, and I told, like, some of them I'm still in contact with, thank you so much, because your wisdom that you shared that time when you were a freshman, like, helped me as an adult. And I'm hoping that it will help others if they're reading to, like, they can connect with some of the wise teachings that you get from the students.
Thank you so much for sharing such vulnerability and telling us what this book means, not only to you, but the impact it has had on you, your community, and other students in our lives. So thank you.
Oh.
And I see that Federick came back twice.
Dr. No. Yeah. We were just talking about technology earlier too. Folks said we were just saying like something might happen, like in here. Yes, something happened.
Yeah, sorry. You know, my eduroam, like I said, always goes out between 11 and 12 o'clock. I'm not sure what's happening. So I'm sorry.
No, don't apologize. That's how life is, and that happens.
I'm sorry. So Charlie, did you just pose the next question, or?
I did not.
Okay.
You came in just at the right time.
Okay, good. Yeah, I think that was a great segue, because actually my next question is more specifically about these monsters. So one of the things that really struck me when reading the book was the conceptualization of systemic oppression and injustice as systemic monsters. And so you help us to engage with this term, systemic monsters, hauntings, monstrous internalization. And, you know, as someone who does like higher ed policy research, I was really just floored and enlightened by this way of talking about these issues that a lot of us think about every day. It was like a totally different plane. And I have to say, I actually felt somewhat hopeful in hearing like oppression and injustice described this way as systemic monsters, because, you know, describing something as a monster means there's weapons, there's warriors, there's heroes, there's victories, which, you know, you don't often feel like that when you're reading journal articles and policy reports that talk about the systemic oppression and intractable injustice that we're facing in higher ed. And so, just thank you for like helping us think differently about these issues that we wrestle with. And so I guess specifically about higher education, why did you think it was important to frame issues in higher education this way?
Yeah, thank you for that, like, personal connection with your work grounded in policy and making those connections. That really makes me, that was good to hear. Honestly, I feel like when I was writing, I wasn't thinking about higher ed. higher ed wasn't my audience. And I was really thinking about my children as my primary audience. And I give a lot of credit, as we know, Toni Morrison talking about the white gaze was just like phenomenal game changer for me, and recognizing how I have been professionalized to write and talk for a white audience. And really having to think about, what does it mean to not write for that audience? Because when you do, you're over explaining, you're doing all the things, and and so for me, knowing my audience, dear Shalchina, starting it that way automatically positioned me to think about the language I want to give for my children. And when I say children, I'm also thinking of all the students who will open it up, the book. And so then the language of monsters, Cecilia was one of the students that brought that conversation into our interviews. She brought the warrior story in. And so I so appreciate her. She's already making connections of her livelihood with the knowledge systems. And then for me then was to what are the contemporary monsters? And there was a process then for me in learning more about my history and the stories of the twin warriors and the monsters, and why are there still monsters living, and questioning all these things. And so my language then was really for Native youth, because when I grew up on the reservation, and I'm embarrassed to admit that in many ways I used to think that, why can't our family get it together? Why are we always struggling? Why is it hard to find such and such work at home? When you grow up in that community, you love it. There's so much beauty, but there's a lot of struggle too. And so when I was done with high school, I was wanting to get out of there. And because I was realizing in all my schooling, I never learned about systems and structures and treaties and land and all that. I didn't learn that. So then if you don't learn that, you think it's your fault. You internalize, the system was designed for us to feel like it's our fault. And it wasn't until later on where I started learning about systems and structures. And then I started seeing whoa, hold up, wait a minute. These challenges that we exist in are longstanding monsters. That's where I started making the connection. They're monsters rooted in settler colonial. That's why I wanted to use languages that my children can use, because they're not learning settler colonialism in high school. They're not learning even about racism. I mean, we have laws right now are trying to take away critical race theory. And so I'm wanting to use language to equip, because it's a part of the equipping them to recognize that we are not at fault for the struggle that we're facing, and that getting an higher education then is important for us to address these monsters that are trying to keep us at status quo, to take away our brilliance, right? And so then higher ed language came later. For me, I'm all about, let me talk to my people. And then I started all right, in higher ed, this is what it means. This is what it means. So this is what do we need to do? And I know that in that part of the higher ed aspect, I probably could have talked a little bit more about making those connections more clear, but I felt right now I'm thinking about language for my people and for my children. So then it was easy. When you're within Navajo and you talk about systemic monsters, twin warrior, they know twin warriors. You don't have to explain. Majority, they know the twin warrior story. They know monsters, they know that. And so it's building on that language and that lexicon for them to all right, well, there's monsters now still, to help, so that way, so they're not like what I did, where then I internalized, the monstrous internalization was working in me, where then I was blaming our struggle, what's wrong with us. And I was seeing it as a deficit, wanting to leave. And that's not me. That's really not me, but I didn't know that. And I feel like that's happening a lot within our communities. Yeah, so that's where that the language came in, and the thinkings and connecting it. And there is a part of me that really wanted to also really center Diné ways in this, center Diné knowledge systems in there. It helped me to learn my culture, my ways more, which was beautiful. And it made me really prideful of, yes, I'm Navajo. It felt good. But it also was like a way of like, I want to do this Diné way. And writing to my letter, framing it that way, gave me the courage to do it that way.
Thank you again. I think something that you reminded me of with your response was the way that you talked about how Native students were meant to feel like they didn't belong. And for folks who didn't know, Dr. Tachine's book went viral a little bit on TikTok. There was some book talkers who were talking about her book and the way that she sort of critiqued and challenged how we talk about imposter syndrome. And I was wondering if you could share more with the folks here about the importance of language and using language to name systems and to put the blame on systems rather than the blame on people. Because I know you talk about it as a superiority syndrome complex when talking about whiteness and white supremacy.
Yeah. And I know that I feel like we're good in higher ed or in academia, maybe we could say, about having these languages, these catchphrase. Gloria Ladson-Billings says these catchphrase that becomes popular that are like rotation, and I'm like starting, and I'm in that. I get that way too. And I have to like pause, like, all right, what do I mean when I say this particular language? So what do I mean when I say imposter syndrome? What do I mean when I say decolonization? What do I mean when I say inclusion, diversity? There's these languages that we are using frequently without intentionality of really understanding where you're coming into that lexicon, where you're coming into that language and how you're seeing it. And so imposter syndrome I felt was one of those languages that I was told when I was an early grad student. I've always dealt with confidence as a person, like second guessing myself. And I had a mentor who told me that it was imposter syndrome. And then I remember looking up the term because I thought I never heard that term before. And when I read it, I was like, yeah, that's me. I started thinking, yeah, that's me. But then fast forward, I started recognizing, like, wait, I honestly, if I would be honest with me, I don't feel inadequate. I don't feel like I'm not smart. I really do feel like I work hard. Like I go hard when it comes to my research. I'm very rigorous. My friends know me. I read really intently. So I know the work I put into it. So then imposter syndrome then felt for me inaccurate of like what I was really feeling. Like I didn't feel insecure. But so then I started learning more about the roots of imposter syndrome, like who wrote this term, and found out that it was two white women who wrote this term based upon a liberal arts college. And the liberal arts college are predominantly white, upper class. So the research was created from white systems, from white framing, with white students. To then I'm cautious about the word language we pick up and use on ourselves that don't match up. And then recognizing it's not an imposter. It's actually, there's this actually superiority syndrome complex. I'm trying to flip the script. Like the system has this issue with wanting to be the top, want to be superior. And they have been doing this with Native people since they came, trying to be superior and trying to create superiority and putting us all into these hierarchies. They have the issue, but we internalize that and we get caught in that. So I'm trying to flip the script of like, you all have the issue. You have the issue wanting to be superior. And so like, don't put that on me is basically what I'm trying to use the language of. And so it helped me then when I'm in places where I'm starting to still feel inadequate, I have to think about, where's this coming from? Are you really feeling insecure in what you're delivering? And I have to be honest, I actually did my work. I'm feeling good. But it's then looking at the system that's like, why does it look like, what is creating the conditions for me to feel inadequate? And recognize like there's a superiority climate occurring in that space that maybe I'm the only native. Why is that an issue? Why I should not be the only native at these type of things. So in the book, I'm starting to have that language in because I was trying to lay out historically how natives have been conditioned to be inferior. It's like it's conditioned. And when then students are in college, it comes out. It's like it's manifested. And they're not recognizing like this has been baked in, this inferiority. So the second guessing of who am I smart enough? All of these start happening, which is that conscious internalization that we're talking about. So I'm trying to help students to while they're reading, they're like, wow, like to look within, but also recognize it's the system that's create the conditions to make you feel this way. And then at the end of the book, I say, that's a call. I'm calling it the superiority complex. So that's where my thinking is around that, is I'm questioning these languages that we take up and we popularize, and without interrogating the root of where that language manifested. And is that then something that connects with you and who you are? And I recognize imposter syndrome for me didn't matter. Now, I also recognize that some people of color will still use it, and that's okay, because for them, maybe that is. And like, I'm not fighting there should be only one way. I'm saying that I'm just giving another viewpoint on this language, and also asking us to pause. Lee Patel asks us to pause on these languages that we're using.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for those powerful thoughts. The next question, so I felt like this book offered such an amazing kind of theorizing, but also an example of methodology as well. And so for those of you who haven't read the book, I want to read just a short excerpt from page 19. And I'm sorry, I don't really have a good radio voice, but it's only a paragraph. But quote, "The story rug has taught me about the power of presence. In research, we often think about the visual and auditory aspect of knowledge through text, pictures, and story. Yet knowledge is also created through multiple senses of touch, taste, and felt, as well as through kinetic movements. Sitting in front of the room, I can feel the rigors of my body warping and then weaving thread through wefts. In the same way, I felt in my body the stories as they were revealed to me. The story rug is more than a methodological shift, it is an ontological shift as well. I'm going to tell you a story, and it's going to be woven like a Navajo rug, like a rug where single strands of yarn help to create and strengthen the complete design. Individual stories will be interwoven throughout to construct the whole story rug." And so this book is a story rug. And I guess I wanted you to share with us like what that means to you, and why you use this approach.
Thank you. And you do have a good voice. You have a radio voice. Yeah, I love methodology. I really, really do, especially qualitative. I mean, qualitative methodology is what I do. I'm dabbling into mix and quant now, thanks to my friend Jameson Lopez, but I love qualitative methods. And so when I was saying earlier about the rigors of research, I'm a nerd when it comes to methods. And so I really like to hear how people process the things, how they engage in their reflexivity approach. I'm just really interested in that. So when I was writing this, my dissertation, I actually was struggling with finding a method that would allow me to not only weave include the 10 stories. We know whenever we're doing qualitative data, we're going to include those stories. We know that. But I also wanted to weave in historical context like I do in the book. So like I did, doing archival work, reading treaties, like bringing that language in. But then there was also my personal story woven throughout as well, because I'm writing to my children, so my voice is in there. And that's another thread of stories. So I feel like in many ways, there's like, that's why I use a language of time traveling. I'm going back in time, but then I'm in the present, then I'm talking with those 10 students. And so it was hard for me though to find a method that allowed me to do those multiple story worlds. And maybe there is something out there and I just don't, I'm not aware of it. And so I don't want to say like I looked everywhere, like I'm sure there is, but I haven't found something like that yet. So I read Joanne Archibald's Storywork book. If y'all haven't read that book, it's just beautiful. And I remember finishing, and she's First Nations, and she describes qualitative research as like a story basket and talks about it from her nation. And at the same time, I've been weaving, like emerging as a weaver. And then I started seeing the connections a little bit more clearly in terms of weaving multiple story strands like a rug, like she was using it as a basket. And so I just started playing with that in my dissertation, and then continued to get support from folks on that engagement. And like just really been grateful to go to conferences like the Indigenous Research Conference in New Zealand at the time. Like there's just been really beautiful seeds along my journey now that I felt like were too good to be true, but I feel like we're meant to be for my development. And so Story Rug then began to just develop. And then the book, I got to a place in this one where I was feeling a little bit more stronger in terms of how I was going to interpret the story rug. And so as you can see in the book too, is one of the things I was really deliberate about was having the icons, the rug textile throughout, because there's a pattern, like there's a pattern to story rug as well. So they're not only bringing in all of these stories, but there is a consistent pattern. There's a rhythm, a cadence in the book. And that's how rug design is. There's a rhythm, there's a design, like you follow a pattern as you're going. And so I like that. And so that it helped me to write it and to think about how I'm going to frame it. So the icon was important for me to start being intentional and help the reader toward that transition of whether I'm going to do a haunting. This is a haunting section, right? This is Marsha's internalization section. This is a weapon section. Like there's that repetition. So I'm really grateful for Lynn Harvey, who is a Navajo creator, and she drew out all the icons for me, and as well as the two figures on the cover of the book. They're actually, I took a picture of my children, that's their bodies, and then Lynn drew them out for the cover of the book. But I wanted to be intentional in terms of explaining that story rug. And I also want to recognize my mentor, Dr. Shanita Lomo-Waima, who gave me the idea of the icons throughout, because I was explaining to her, I'm struggling with, like, I don't want to keep telling the reader, like, okay, I'm switching to hauntings now. Okay, I'm switching to monstrous. Like, I don't want to do that. And so she's like, why don't you maybe do like an icon? And so that like helped me, like, oh, I didn't think about that. So I appreciate my conversation with her about that. She helped me. But I'm excited because now it makes me think about, all right, what's my next story rug? What's my next design? And that pattern structure and my analysis of how I did that helps me to see the possibilities of what a story rug would look like. And I don't feel like I have to like look for another methodology. I kind of have one. And so now it's like, what's my new design I'm going to do? What stories am I going to have in that? Which is really cool. It feels exciting to allow for that to happen. And also as another way that I'm asserting Diné knowledge again. Like that's Indigenous methodology. And I'm saying, like, this is knowledge that's been passed down for generations. Like, it gives me so much joy to say, like, my ancestors were researchers. Spider Woman was a researcher. Like, it gives me so much agency to acknowledge that, especially given that our people have been like dehumanized and delegitimized as knowledge holders. And I'm here to say, like, shoot, we have amazing researchers in my lineage. So it allows me to have that. And that's really powerful for me as a Diné woman to acknowledge that. And it keeps me going too. Another way it keeps me going.
Thank you. And so we're entering our final set of questions here. And just a reminder to the audience, you can feel free to input a question if you want us to pose for the chat. But so it's very clear that you wrote this book for Indigenous youth. I do want to ask, however, how you hope this text might challenge and shape the study of higher education and training in higher education programs.
if those of you who haven't read it, you probably, when you do read it, hopefully you'll read it. There's a nod that I give to folks, student affairs folks, policymakers. Like I call it like a brief note, because I really try to like keep my vision and my voice and audience for Native throughout the whole book. And then I got to a place when I was writing towards the end, I'm like, I should write something to non-Native youth. And there I give some kind of like, I know we like to have like, all right, tell me 3 things I could do now, like tips, like what can we do? And the way I was raised is that, when we would often be in places, we'd hear stories from my grandparents or, our teachers. They never tell you like why they're telling you this story. They just, you have to kind of like, there's a message in there for you, and it's your job to figure out what that message is and how it's connecting to your life. And so I was really trying to keep to that teaching of not doing, I think oftentimes in higher ed, we like to put responsibility, or like, okay, there's a Native person. Okay, what do we do now then? Tell us what to do. And in the book, I was trying not to do that, because I wanted the people who are reading the book to do the labor of figuring out, all right, I read this, I learned this. Now, what does this mean for the work I'm doing? And it's going to be different for everybody. It's going to be different for the person hired in res life. It's going to be different for the person administrator. It's going to be different for the admissions person, the recruiter, the Native center. Everyone's going to come into it differently. And so I hope then for those of you who pick it up that you'll pause and you think, all right, what does this mean for me in my work? And not just my work, what does this mean for me in my life? Because as we know that it's beyond 8 to 5. It's like also like asking, I'm hoping it's asking you like, what does this mean for the relationships you have to people and to place in the land that you're at? And so it's kind of open-ended in that way, but it's really meant to be, because that's a teaching that we were taught, is like, it's not a copy easy answer. Like, this is what you got to do. It's a part of you figuring out what you need to do to advance the work, or to advance that part. So, but there is a little brief in there for you to think about, to help you stimulate some ideas. And what does this mean for higher ed? I do feel like what is needed though is that Native should be going to college like without having to pay. And I definitely think that that's really critical, and it should be across the nation. I mean, given the history of this place and land, like, and also knowing the enrollment rates, the hauntings, our Native enrollment is decreasing, and it just really scares me. It hurts my heart. And I think that, financial is one huge burden that connects that. Of course, the culture and the campus is huge as well, but I also think that, and I think that is needed. So I'm an advocate for providing full financial support for Native students to be able to get to college and get a degree.
Hashtag same. Hashtag ditto. So this question is kind of a personal, selfish question as a young Indigenous scholar, compared to you and the brilliance that you've shared. But I also know there are other amazing Black, Indigenous, and scholars of color who are emerging and who are being mentored by the very people who are in attendance. So my question is what advice or what words of wisdom, insight, inspiration do you have for these young Black, Indigenous, and scholars of color who are hoping to engage in research that celebrates their brilliance and the brilliance of their community?
Oh my gosh, Charlie, my brain is going all over the place as I like have so much I want to share. Like, okay, focus, Amanda. Focus on what's really, I think right now what's pressing on my heart is really like, take care of yourself first and foremost. Like, truly take care of yourself. Take care of your spirit, take care of your heart, take care of your relationships, take care of yourself. And that is so critical because we need you for the long game. And this is something I tell my students, because there's so many things. These monsters are everywhere and they're going to trip you up. They're going to trip you up in your institution. You're going to have a racist faculty member that's going to just rock your world, and it's going to be really painful for some of you if you haven't already encountered that. And I have to just think about in those moments, again, Toni Morrison's word on distractions. And this is something I say to my own students. They're all Native. I have an amazing Native PhD student group. And I was like, Toni Morrison says there's these distractions, and I'm not going to say as accurate, but I'm going to summarize. She said something to the tune of like, when they ask you over and over again, where you have to explain why you're speaking a certain language, why your hair is a certain way, why this, why that, those are distractions because it takes you away from your true purpose. And so I tell my students then, like, is this a distraction that's taking you away from your purpose? And it doesn't mean that it's a dismissal. It's a mean of like, what is your long game? What is your big picture of what you want to do? And then reassess where you're at right now and what you need to do to continue this long game. So taking care of yourself is really critical. And I think I didn't really understand that. I was the type that always felt like in the airplane when they say buckle yourself first, then your kid. I'll be like, what the heck? I gotta buckle my kid first, then I'll buckle myself, you know? And so I used to always feel that way. But then now as I'm older, I'm like, no, like we really have to take care of ourselves and our spirit. Because we are valuable and we're sacred, and we need more of us to continue the long game, because it's a long game. It's a marathon. It's not, the fight is huge. Monsters are huge, long-standing, centuries old. So for those of you who are in it, like cultivate now ways of nourishing your spirit and your soul. Have really good people around you. I think that's really been a hard lesson for me too, is like cultivate relationships that really uplift you and that stir your spirit and that you can encourage, and there's an encouragement, because sometimes those relationships can also hurt you, and then you have to know when to let go and to cultivate good relationships. And not saying that those were bad, but just recognizing what you need at that time. And those are really hard decisions to make. The other aspect too is like really be engaged in other literature. Like I'm a big avid about reading out of our field, reading across different genres, different folks. My good friend Kian McGuire uses the language of solidarity rigor, meaning solidarity scholarship, meaning like if I'm learning Black literature and so I'm reading that, it's important for me because I care so much for my Black relatives, and so I'm reading and learning. And so in other communities, I think we could all do that, of doing that type of solidarity work. But please take care of yourself and be kind to yourself, and don't beat yourself up. Have grace for yourself, rest, do all those things are really critically important for you, because we need you for the long game.
Thank you for that insight. I shall go rest.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. The last question is, how are you continuing or expanding this work? Like sort of this, what's the future? What's the next story rug?
Oh my gosh, there are so many great things brewing right now. It's like, there's so many great projects coming my way, and I'm alongside others, and I can't wait to share more. I mean, I'm working right now with Jameson Lopez and Native American organizations like the American Indian College Fund, the Cobell Scholars, Native Forward, and the American Indian Science and Engineering Society. Like we have some really great work where we're actually looking at campus climate from a Native perspective and designing. We're hoping to design a survey that's actually going to use it from a Indigenous knowledge system of what does it mean for belonging for Natives, that looks at not individual, like I've been doing individual work, student work. Now it's like system work, system level work. So I'm really excited for that. And we're going to have papers coming out and work on that, videos coming out. I'm engaging a lot more in creative ways of disseminating knowledge because I love that. So looking at videographers, learning how to do that. And my dear thing that I put on my planner this year, I've been tossing it around in my brain, but I'm going to be verbal about it, is I really want to write a young adult book. And so I'm really working to learn how to, so I've been reading a lot of young adult books this year. I'm really excited about all the wonderful literature that's coming out, and I want to add to that. And I want to write a book about a young Navajo girl and friendship, a book about friendship and about love and about, you know, the coming of age Navajo story. So I'm excited to do that work too.
I'm excited. You recently co-wrote something with Marvel with EV Wing, didn't you?
Yeah, actually I'm excited. I wrote an essay on Marvel Indigenous Heritage. It's called Voices Heritage. It's a book that has comics written by Native Indigenous writers and Native artists. And so, yeah, it's so cool. My kids think I'm cool. Well, it didn't last that long. I was like, I'm a Marvel writer now. I contributed to Marvel. We're big Marvel fans. Like my another goal is I want to write a Marvel comic book. And so I'm putting it out there. So if anyone's out there, Marvel, you hear me. I love imagining worlds and building worlds. And it just gets me excited to do that type of work. So yeah, thanks for thinking that. Yeah. So you can get that out. It's out. You can purchase that through Marvel's website. It's called Marvel Voices Heritage.
Thank you. This would be the audience's last chance to enter any Q&A. The only one I see is, how do I work with you, Amanda? So maybe you could pop in the preferred contact information or like your website link so people could reach out to you.
Yeah, email me. Tell me what you're thinking. I don't know if I have access to, I don't have access to put on everyone's on the chat.
If you chat it to me, I'm happy to make sure it gets out to everyone.
Okay, perfect.
Oh, thank you. I've had to switch to my phone because my internet for some reason. Yeah, well, this has been absolutely wonderful. I'm so encouraged and inspired and challenged, just even from this chat alone, but also from reading the book. I would encourage everyone in the audience to get a copy of the book, ask your local library or your institutional library to get the book. If at the very least, so your students can have access to it. It really is a phenomenal work. And, you know, the committee was so excited to receive this nomination and get to engage with the book this summer. Check one more time. Nope. There's anything else? I don't know, Charlie, do you have any final remarks or anything?
Let's just say that I love this book, and to share that I actually am using it for my own dissertation. So if there's anything, there's at least one student who is inspired by your work and continue to expand it, and also who feels empowered to use the weapons of my own community, of our community, to engage with methodology and theory. So thank you for that. And thank you so much for your vulnerability and what you have shared with us today. It was truly beautiful to witness, and also my heart is full and warm. I feel great.
Oh, yeah, Nadon, thank you so much for all this time. It really made my heart feel good too. And thanks again for those of you who stayed with us. And thank you for ASHE. This was really beautiful. Yeah.
All right, thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day.